Discover prototypical track and turnouts with the Roadmaster series from Oak Hill Model Railroad Track Supply. Proudly made in the United States, Oak Hill's handcrafted turnouts provide unparalleled detail and accuracy, giving your layout museum-quality track work at an affordable price. Whether fully built or in easy-to-assemble kit form, Roadmaster provides all the details of real track. Looking for a custom piece of track work? Oak Hill can help with custom turnouts, diamonds, crossings, and more. Check out all of their offerings on their website, ohrtracksupply.com. For over 25 years, Highball Graphics has been providing high-quality decals for railroads in New England, Canada, and beyond. With over 2,000 sets in scales N through G, Highball Graphics has you and your project covered. Highball Graphics specializes in custom decal orders, serving freelance railroads worldwide. Check out their easy-to-use website at highballgraphics.com or email them at info@highballgraphics.com.
ATLP Rewind.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. Welcoming back to Around the Layout, the incomparable Lance Mindheim. Lance, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me back. We had a great time last time. I'm looking forward to a repeat. I always enjoy chatting with you.
Oh, I've had a blast chatting the last time. We went through so many really cool topics, and as I'm preparing for this recording, I listened to the first podcast, and we covered a lot of really cool topics and kind of the mindset of model railroading, the why behind model railroading, and that was a really fun topic to cover.
Oh, yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's you get me rolling on that, I won't shut up.
Well, that's the idea, to get you talking, because it is a podcast and people love to hear you talk about model railroading, the passion you have behind it, and the theory you have behind it really has inspired a lot of folks, and now including me. And I've been reading through your new book that we're going to be talking about. But I wanted to first give an opportunity, because one thing we didn't get to cover a whole lot of in the first recording was the layouts that you have. And I wanted to kind of go through those and have you tell us a little bit about that and kind of your why behind the layouts that you own and have built. And I wanted to start with the one that I think maybe the one that known more for is the Downtown Spur. Why don't you tell us a bit about how that came to fruition, and then a little bit about it, and of course about operating it.
It's kind of embarrassing when I admit how many layouts I have, but going back in time, I really only have one large one. That's the Downtown Spur. But for many years I had an N-scale Monon layout, and that had really run its course, and I was happy with it. It was too darn big. 20 by 20. When you look at it through the HO blinders, it's not that big, but in N-scale, it's 40 by 40, and it was getting to be too much. And they tore up the track that it was based on in my hometown. And when they tore up the track of the prototype, I kind of lost interest. And so I was looking for a new theme. And I don't know if it was, I've always liked Miami, and I guess the Miami Vice vibe, primarily because it's different. And I was just thinking about this afternoon. I got back from Missouri, a few weeks ago, and I'm thinking, when you get down to it, Missouri, Connecticut, Maryland, Indiana, Illinois, they look pretty darn similar. I mean, there's some cornfields in eastern Maryland that look just like the ones in Missouri, and driving up your way, I mean, you see a big swath of the country looks similar. So I really wanted to do something different, and I wasn't really sure how to go about doing that. And I was sure as heck wasn't going to tear down the Monon layout until I knew what I was doing. And so I started researching Florida layouts. I was getting nowhere. Enlisted some friends, and they were sending me possible ideas, still getting nowhere. So this dragged on for, I don't know, a year or two. And I always go to Cocoa Beach. It's one of my favorite RPM meets. And I gave just a small clinic, and better lucky than smart. At the end of the clinic, and there's probably only 15 guys in this small room, I just explained what I was trying to do, my frustration, and asked if anybody had any ideas to, catch me after. Well, David Orr, the vice president mechanical for CSX, was in the room, and Bill McCoy, the former Seaboard Airline marketing guy, was in the room. They pulled me, they said, "We got just the thing for you." And railroaders can spin a story. And they just painted this view of Miami that I was just absolutely hooked, and got the yarns they can tell. And I have to be fair. A lot of times you think they're embellishing, and then you find out a year later, it's like, geez, he was telling the truth. It is that. So, so they got me all wound up, and David said, just check your mailbox. I got a Christmas present coming for you. And sure enough, 3 days later, it was a binder full of the Miami track charts from CSX.
Wow.
And yeah, I'm still in touch with David, and what a great gift. So a month later, I flew to Miami, and the funny story was they said, you get down there, it's kind of smelly because it's part of the Santeria religion. They believe that you ward off evil or bring good things. If you take a live chicken, stick it in a bag, maybe put some cash, drape it over the rails, and then it gets splattered by the train, it wards off evil. And I'm like, David, you are so full of it. SHIT, man. It's just like, no way. And, but it's a hell of a good story. And then Bill McCoy is getting wound up, and he's talking about the day that, we went on to work, and one of the crew guys said, FYI, there's a body in that gondola, and, FYI, it does not have a head attached to it. So
yikes.
I'm getting these stories. So I guess the next flight down to Miami, I get out of the rental car, I get to the Downtown Spur track, and what do I see? About 10 chickens splattered all over the rail. And so I had to take back everything I said about David, but it's just really, it's like being in a different country, and I was totally hooked.
Yeah.
So I wanted to kind of, jump into this on a small scale and do a proof of concept. So I did a small switching layout called East Rail, which is just a very small industrial park near the Downtown Spur. And I'm like, this is a lot of fun. I'm pretty much going to be kicked out of the hobby when people see this. I mean, it's just so different. Nobody's going to talk to me again. And, but I was amazed how that caught on. And it was one of the best layouts I've ever had. So then I did something really stupid. It's like, okay, East Rail is proof of concept. I'm going to go all out and build the Downtown Spur, which is, basement filling, 3.5 mile branch. So I sold the East Rail layout, the dumbest thing I ever did. But I didn't realize it for a few years. So the main layout in the basement is the Downtown Spur, which is the old Seaboard Airline double track main into the passenger station near 7th Avenue. And then that was truncated when they built I-95, and they changed it into this high density industrial spur.
So going back to the East Rail layout that you built, and I just think it's a really interesting concept that you built it kind of like as an experiment, and kind of a neat lesson for others that, if you're thinking about a big layout build or even a medium build to start small with something like that and see if it really, I guess, catches your fancy once you get done building it. Am I right in that?
I think so. And then I guess of all my annoying mantras, I think one of them is it's really important to get into the game. And I was talking to a friend of mine who will remain anonymous other than to say his initials are Tom Johnson, that
I wonder who that is.
And we were talking, and I just said that, if we look at everybody in our universe and all our friends and acquaintances and people we know and people we correspond with, what percentage do you think really don't build models? And I'm not going to say don't have a layout, but just don't even assemble freight cars, or more fans of the hobby and participant. And I said, I think, Tom, that it's 50%. And he said, no, I think it's more than that. And the problem that you run into, particularly, I do a lot of design work. If I didn't have people new to the hobby, I'd be out of business. But if you've never built anything, you don't have that mental A to B link in terms of how difficult or time consuming a task is. And so people come in, they're very excited. They've read all these great articles, and they put a lot of pressure on me to come up with these designs I know there's no way in hell they can build. And then you also run into the situation, people get busy. You get your 50, 55-year-old executive. He's got a lot going with family and friends, and he's really looking forward to the day when he can have that layout. And they all do. But the problem is they hit 65, 67 years old. They've got this dream, but they haven't accrued the necessary skills and made the mistakes to get a good launch, which is a long loop to go back to the East Rail. Is if you did something like that, or even smaller, the skills that you get from building that would apply to a larger layout. You just do the same thing and just repeat it over a larger scale. And the other thing too is that with a layout like that, it's attainable, it's achievable, it's something that you can work into a busy lifestyle, without getting bogged down. So it was a success on all fronts.
Yeah, it's just a really neat idea. Again, like you said, good place to get to learn your why, and then like you said, understand what it takes to build a layout. Just really cool idea to just get that started with something small. But now you've figured that out. Now you're rolling into the CSX Miami. I've interrupted you a little bit here, but I want you to kind of roll into the Downtown Spur and tell us more about that, because some really cool story other than running over chickens and maybe headless people in gondolas.
So with the success of the East Rail, I knew that I was onto a theme that I would enjoy, and I would dig into something much bigger. So I tore down the Monon layout, kept the rolling stock in the buildings. For once, I did something smart. I didn't sell them off, and I still have some of them. So the rest of the layout went into the dumpster and started on the East Rail, which I'm trying to stay pretty close to the prototype. I mean, nobody has any room to come, even remotely close to model, even a 3-mile branch. But I tried to keep things in the right order and have individual scenes, be pretty representative, of what was there on the prototype. And the one thing I tried, and I would encourage other people to do, is momentum in model railroading is really crucial. And this gets back to my design businesses. You want to be in a situation where 6, 7, 8 months down the road, you've got the bench work down and at least running some trains. And it's very common for me to run into people that are new to the hobby that are very enamored with this concept of hand laying track. That's going to take you forever. And I didn't want to hand lay the track, but I wanted to be fairly detailed. So what I did, and I would encourage others to do this, is in one weekend, I just got Atlas Code 83 and some Elmer's glue, and I just got the whole thing down and up and running. And that really did a lot for morale. Then once I had that, I could kind of see what I had. And then just, every weekend or so, I'd replace 3, 4, 5 feet of it with the more detailed microengineering track. I had a lot of mock-ups, and then I'd build the actual structure and replace the mock-ups. So that was kind of the construction sequence. And it was really built to be operated. The advantage is that I can go down there and see them run. I've got a lot of friends down there that you've got Toga and Tom Klomoski that can send me videos and pictures. So I pretty much have, kind of a quasi live stream of what's going down there, so you can run it pretty accurately.
So I think what you're saying there about the momentum is kind of like the flywheel, and keep the flywheel turning, and also have those small victories that help keep you going, i.e. laying, track down, even if you don't want it to be your final track, at least getting something down so you can start to see the accomplishment and start to, use it a little bit and be able to have that little bit of gratification.
Yes, exactly. And removing track is pretty easy. The trick is you just want to go light with the glue. But if you just put a thin bead of Elmer's down the track center line and tack it down, when you want to replace it, you can just wet it a little bit and it'll pop right up. So it's pretty easy to replace it later.
So that's great. So East Rail's giving you all that experience. You're doing that, getting some instant gratification, and getting that momentum going, the flywheel going, and then obviously into the Downtown Spur, and then your passion of going there. And you talk about site visits in the book, and you did that yourself. You got down there and you got to see it and got to experience it.
Yeah, I really think that's vital in terms of, to the extent you can. I mean, we don't all have that luxury, but I think the magic of our hobby, what really is happening is we have this, there's a mental link or something that happens in our mind where we have this really positive memory or recollection of the prototype, going out and filming it by ourselves, walking it with relatives, grandparents, or buddies, just the power and mass and, the fascination of the real thing. And so once you've made that site visit, as you're operating your layout, you have this mental link where you can kind of ratchet back and forth between what you have in front of you and the memory. Whereas if you don't have that, you can still have fun, but it's not going to have the visceral or the emotional attachment that you would get from having been to the site. So I do think that's important. And I would say that even if you can't do that, try to get some rail fanning in too. If you can, whatever your theme is, get something that's, somewhat representative, and, treat yourself to a trip to see the real thing every now and then.
Yeah, I think, if you were unable to get to Miami, although you wouldn't have been able to have the experience that you described, any industrial park would have probably given you at least some idea, or a little better idea than, say, not seeing anything at all, obviously.
Yeah, there's a lot of more than a little bit. It would get you really close, I think.
Yeah.
And particularly now where we have, so many, the consolidation even more so.
So as you're starting to design the Downtown Spur, what were you looking to accomplish? What were some of the things that you knew as you were putting your track plan together and you're setting up and what your bench work is going to be? What were some of the things that were like the check boxes on your list of, I've got to have this to represent this well?
That's where people get in trouble, because at some point you've got to accept the fact that something's got to go to the cutting room floor. And if you don't, and a lot of people can't let it go, you're going to have a dumpster fire. I mean, it's just going to look like Disneyland. But I'm going to answer that a little different way. I mean, I knew where it started, I knew where it ended. And there's really only so many benchwork shapes that are going to work. I mean, you line the walls of the room and you have your center peninsula. That's going to give you your most efficient. So then it was just a matter of, you draw the bench work on the back of a napkin. You don't need a computer. You don't need to debate all your buddies on the forum for 6 months. And you run the track down the center of the bench work. And then at that point, you have to decide what elements will fit and what don't. And, guys like Paul Dokos, Tom Johnson, they do it in 1-to-1 scale. I mean, they will tape it out on the floor and then put the mock-ups up, which is far more effective than a drawing. And to be honest with you, it's been so long, I don't remember the exact process. The only thing I remember is the bridge. And there's a very iconic lift bridge. It shows up in all the historical photos. It was in Miami Vice. The thing is a beauty. The reality is it wouldn't fit. And it's been 15 years. I keep going down there every day saying, is there a way that fit this thing in? And the answer is the same as it's been for 15 years. No. So,
but you're still thinking about it. But yeah, it's hard. It's the stuff that you said that's on the editing room floor that you wish you could figure out how to pick up and put on, but it probably don't make the picture right.
And a good comparison is the movie industry. If you take, a really good filmmaker, they will tell you that, they have enough film for 4-5 hours of movie. Nobody's going to watch that. And it's really tough because they've got all this, they got great actors, great writing, they've got all these good scenes, but they've got to make the hard decisions so that you have something cohesive. You have to, sacrifice all these things for the whole. And that's a bitter pill to swallow. But in the end, if you can force yourself to, look at the big picture and let some things go, you'll end up with a better product in the end.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's knowing, like you said, what is too much and what needs to, what is going to tell your story in the most effective way. And I think that's a movie thing. And I definitely think it's a model railroading thing as well.
With the Downtown Spur, it's not so complicated. I was able to get every industry in it. There were some stretches of some pretty interesting buildings that just had to go. Now, actually, I'm going to take that back. There was one interesting one I didn't have room for, but I got most of it in without it looking too cramped, because it's a city. So that gives you a little bit, you don't have to worry about, creating that distance between towns. It's just one place.
I am going to ask you a why question about your Downtown Spur that I noticed in the pictures. That's a pretty substantial building in there, is the Miami Highlight building. And I'm curious about that, your inclusion of that. And I'm wondering if there was a purpose behind that.
You see it everywhere. And I did this same thing with the Bishop Street project I did for Model Railroader. And this goes back to the site visits. You go down there enough times and it's just like, wherever I turn, left, right, look, east, west, there's always this one iconic structure. And I just felt that I needed to include it. Again, it was, they had a whole episode of Miami Vice, but it's pretty darn big, and it's right at the entrance of the spur. There's really no way to avoid it. It was not easy to build, but it really just kind of put a stamp on the spur. I mean, it's just that and the bridge had to go, but that one did fit.
Yeah, it just kind of becomes the anchor and, lets you know where you are and kind of reference point. That's really cool. It also seems to me like it may serve a little bit of like a view block as well between the two where you have to look around that building to see the other side.
That's correct. And if I had to say one thing I don't like about the layout is what you said, is that when you walk into the room, it all unfolds in front of you. It's a square 20 by 20 room. There's really no backdrops. And all my friends tell me I'm obsessing over things that nobody else notices, but that's how I roll. But I've just had to accept the fact that, that does help having that there. And I did have a valance I put in. I'm not sure that makes a big of a difference, but view blocks can really add a lot to a layout.
Yeah, I figured maybe that was one of them, or an unintended purpose, but it definitely does break up the view across that peninsula area, and just a really neat layout. So tell me about, because I saw a video on there, and your buddy Tolga there shot a video of him doing some operations on it, which was really fascinating to watch. Tell us a little bit about operating that and kind of what you've got for an operating scheme on there.
It's pretty easy. And I had some guys over, some B&O modelers last weekend, and they have bigger layouts, and they were talking about car cards and all these computer generated switch lists. But with the Downtown Spur, some of these are it's a machine looking for a job. I mean, let's be smart about this. There's some things a human brain can do better. And just because you're using a computer doesn't give you a better end result. And if your layout is small and you're familiar with the prototype, they do the same darn thing every time. I mean, there's not that many industries. I know where what types of cars go, which ones are switched the most frequently. So, and I know from Tolga's videos and others what happens. So I just copy what they actually do.
Yeah, I mean, I think I do this kind of the same thing when I'm operating my smaller layout. And, of course, I know where things go. And I think after a while, my operators kind of figure out where things go. It's not like I've got identical cars going to all the same industries. It's, okay, this is a lumber load. It must go to the lumber yard. It's like you start to figure out those kinds of things and kind of simplify it down. Even with the car cards present, you really don't need it. And you can kind of get that mentality.
And if it's a guest, I mean, that's their first time there. They're not going to know that you ran the same thing the day before. Or if they come once a month, they're not going to remember who remembers what cars they had. But you're right. I don't even check the car cards because, one scrap dealer has one type of gondola, the other has a totally different type. I mean, there's not that much thinking in terms of what goes where. I do have a CSX switch list that I use to keep me on track, but it's pretty methodical. And, one time I was down there with Tom Komoski, and to our good fortune, the locomotive broke down temporarily, which meant that the crew was, unfortunately, the victim of all of our questions. They made the mistake of getting out of the cab, so we pounced on them. And they're really nice down there. And so I said, well, what happens if you don't get everything done? And she goes, well, we're only allowed to work so many hours. If we don't get everything done, either we will come back tomorrow, or in rare occasions, they'll send a night crew down, but we'll probably just come get it tomorrow. So you come down. I mean, safety drives everything in modern railroading, as it should. They come in, they have their jobs. It takes as much time as it takes. And, there's no banging of cars or, speeding. They go in, they do the deal. They've done it a million times. And if it doesn't get done, the next guy gets it.
That's a great kind of concept that kind of reminds me of a situation I saw not too long ago out in Western Connecticut. I happened upon, while I was in my full-time job travels, of a railroad switching out a paper mill with 50-foot high cubes. And anybody that's listened to the podcast knows my affinity for 50-foot high cubes. So that immediately draws my attention. But they're shoving cars in and they're pushing them back into this paper mill through the door opening. And I'm listening on the radio and they're like, no, they said they can't take that other one. Go ahead and send it back down the hill. And it just, to me, that element, like when we set up ops at times and it's like, it has to be perfect, 3 in, 3 out, 3 out. And then the human element. And then if you could mix that in, or like you said, the imperfect, hey, we didn't get the job finished today, we'll come back tomorrow. So it kind of shakes up ops if you can kind of mix that little bit of human element into it, like you were talking about.
Yeah, I agree. I had like the experience of a lifetime last week where I got a tour of a short line by the general manager. And he said the thing that drives him crazy that they're really running into a lot is the situation you just explained. Is they come in with a load of 5 cars, and the shipping manager comes out and says, okay, we can take 3, but we didn't get the other 2 unloaded. So then you got to shuffle all of them around. And what they do, most places, they just leave the cars there. Then they'll come back, or at the gate, and they'll come back and get them. And they said, yeah, we get paid demurrage. We get, in theory, more money for doing this, but it's such a pain in the rear having these things backed up. But it's a real issue. This particular short line was really busy, and all the cars are coming in and the yard's clogging up, but the customers aren't getting them unloaded. So there's not much you can do with that. If the space isn't there, it's not there.
Well, it's funny. Their inconvenience sounds like awesome ops in the model railroading side. You know, it sounds just like really neat scenarios to kind of shake up and to add to an op session would be a lot of fun. And you don't have to make it overly complicated. Just add a little bit of that, inconvenience or human factor. And boy, that sounds like a lot of fun to me.
I think, and you were talking about site visits and rail fanning, is there's such a disconnect between how model railroaders operate a switching layout and the way that it really happens. The model railroad approach is a lot of intensity, a lot of volume, a lot of speed, kind of a checklist approach. Here's my grocery list, let's get it done so I can, end this hobby as soon as I can and go mow the lawn. I mean, but in the real world, there's a lot more collaboration between crew members and industry reps. And I remember I was at East Rail probably 15 years ago, and they had this hellacious backup move into a warehouse. It was like they had a handle of like 15 cars. They had to be spotted, and it was around a blind curve. There's only 2 of them. I mean, you have the conductor and the engineer. And it was interesting, and you would never see a model railroad do this. The engineer gets out of the cab, and the conductor comes up, and they just talk for like 10 minutes about, how the heck are we going to do this without damaging anything, without anybody getting hurt. And then they both nodded their heads, and then the engineer got back in the cab, and the conductor went, out of view, and they very carefully, did the switching. And, one of my buddies, he's up your way. I don't know if you know Jim Lincoln, used to be with CSX. He was explaining switching a corn syrup plant. Well, the first thing they do is you get out of the cab, and he goes and talks to the general manager of the plant, in terms of what are we going to do here? What do you want? They're the customer. Are there cars that have not been unloaded? Usually there are. They just kind of discuss the game plan. So there's an interaction between the company often and the railroad employees also.
Right. I think that gives a lot of neat ideas. And boy, I could go on and on about some crazy ideas I just got about changing op scenarios and, floating op scenarios. And boy, you could have a lot of fun with that and a blast. But I want to get back to some of the layout stuff. You talked about you regretted getting rid of East Rail, though it was an experimental kind of thing for you and it led to a bigger project. But now you're recreating East Rail with East Rail 2. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that project that's going on?
Yeah, I thought it was a good idea getting rid of it. There was a young modeler, Greg Lures. He's very talented, very good at weathering. And I had put it on eBay, and the night before, I had 150 watchers. I'm like, oh boy, I'm going to be rich. I should be shopping for some place in the south of France. Man, this thing is going to go. Maybe I should start shopping for Porsches. Next day, not one bid. So, and a couple people called up and said, can I give you a couple $100 with it for it? And I said, no. So I said, well, I'll just keep the darn thing. Well, then Greg contacted me and says, do you still have it? I said, yes. And at the time, he was still a student at Purdue. So he worked all summer to come up with the money, and his then girlfriend, now wife, and he drove out, and he bought the layout and took it back. And I felt great because it was in good hands, great modeler, pristine condition. But life moves on, and they got a new place that wasn't smaller, but it was a different shape. And so he was not able to keep it. And I kept going, well, maybe I should track it down, go buy it. And I started doing the math. It's like, geez, by the time I rent the truck, drive from Maryland to Indiana, buy it back, all the gas, it's not that big. What the hell? I'll just build it again. Applying lessons learned. I changed it a little bit, but I'm making a copy of it and having a blast doing it.
So that's great. Is it basically the same track plan, or have you've made any modifications from the original as far as what the layout is?
It's L-shaped, each leg of the L about the same. So one, scenery-wise and track-wise, is identical. One side is. And then on the other side, I streamlined it and took 2 turnouts that were just 2 model railroady out and just kind of improved the visuals a little bit. But it's pretty close.
4 turnouts. Am I counting that right on the East Rail too?
Yeah. That's $80 worth. I don't look at it as 4 turnouts. It's $64 worth of Tam Valley frog juicers.
That's how you do the math. That's great. But I just love the simplicity of it. And I think there's so much that can be learned from that. And again, we talk about the entryway in, or a way to learn things. And yet another, this is, the prime example with either East Rail or East Rail 2 of 4 turnouts, or, like you said, whatever your frog juicers. But anybody that's looking to get into the hobby, look at a simple plan like this. And then you can, there's variances in here. You learn how to create water with a canal, and, parking lots, and build some structures, and, some with that Lance Mindheim famous negative space. And I think this is a really cool thing for somebody. If you're looking to get into the hobby and start somewhere, this is a really cool idea to do it and get you up and operating pretty quick with some really simple but enjoyable ops.
I think in theory, I agree with you. In terms of how the real world operates, I don't think that's going to happen, because it should, but it's not. I think this type of layout is going to appeal more to maybe somebody's new. It appeals more to the prototype guy, I think. In the hobby, we have 2 groups. The largest is the casual recreationalist, and that's what pays the bills. I mean, they want the hills, the tunnels, the bridges, lots of elements going in. And what they want, and these are the calls I take, is they want the Lynn Westcott 101 track plan configuration. This is of zero interest to them. Now, somebody it's interesting. I know a number of people that just have gone from 0 to 100. Just one day they were interested, guys in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and they're not interested in toys. They're prototype modelers. They're busy with careers. So I think those are the guys that it's going to appeal to more. Maybe new to the hobby, but I would say with a prototype orientation.
Oh yeah, definitely that. I mean, if they weren't into anything that was, prototype operations, I think they would be more falling towards the 4x8 again, right? Or, that kind of thing where they're running around and that kind of stuff. But if you're, looking to get into operations, to me, something like this, or maybe even less than this, may be a great starting point.
Yeah, I think so.
So East Rail 2, you've got that rolling. So you've got a bunch of layouts, a bunch of projects down there, and obviously the Downtown Spur to operate. And you had an operating session there that Tolga did a great video. We'll share that in the notes. In the time that you and I have talked, we've seen 2 books come out from you and the things that you've put together. And I've seen both, and I have the newest one in my hands. And boy, I'm just really excited. And when I got that in hand and started reading it, it was really hard not to put the book down and go grab a piece of extruded foam and start to get to work, because it's so exciting. But I want to talk about the first 24 pages of that, because you give some really great insight and great guidance for those that are looking to start or look at a project and design a project, the things to consider. I want you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it really starts on a couple fronts. One is the willingness to break free from kind of the model railroad culture and at least be open to different ways of going about it. But if you look at any great artist, just take Hopper, for example. He was up your way. Now, you're up in Connecticut or Mass?
Yeah, I'm in Connecticut.
Yeah, so just one state over, they had the Hopper exhibit. Well, these guys, they don't just roll into their studio in the morning and say, what the heck am I going to do? They go to the site and they will spend 2 or 3 days just studying it, sometimes more. And there's a good lesson there. And in terms of the scenery, you can either go out yourself or just look at a picture and say, what the heck am I looking at? And it takes some practice, particularly when, old habits die hard. But the reality is, in the last 10 years, we've gotten a lot more tools to work with, much better products, a broader range of products, but they get kind of lost in the catalog because nobody wants to get rid of their inventory and the stuff is still going off the shelves. So as a purchaser, you've the right stuff is in that catalog. You just have to know what you're looking for. So the first point I would make is really to just really study, what it is in front of you. What are the textures? What are the colors? Particularly colors is something that the hobby has really suffered from. And I was talking to Jim at Scenery Express, and he kind of threw the Europeans under the bus. And he's such an asset to this hobby. But we were talking about getting more realistic colors, and we get everything from Europe mostly. And they said, well, the Europeans love that, so that's all they make is the lime greens and the ochres, and this is what they want, so this is all I've got. And I said, well, can't you beat them up a little bit? And he said, I don't have that much leverage. But
Yep.
If you go through, just take Silfor, for example, they've got some great products, but you have to go through the catalog, and you may have to order a couple because it's very hard to tell from a photograph. But if you just take your typical Maryland, Indiana, Illinois, Connecticut line side scene, the trees, they're not blue green, they're not lime, they're not ochre, they're not olive, they're more of an emerald green. And the good news is those colors are available. You just have to create an awareness of what you're looking at. So, the one piece of advice I have is just to, study your subject. And the one thing that you're going to find, and this is probably the hardest part of the book, is you're never looking at one color. And I was telling you earlier that part of the book, the big reason for the book was to improve my own modeling. And I had used monotones a lot for streets, parking lots. But if you look at an aerial view of a parking lot or a street, the bad news is there's 30 colors in there, and they're very close to each other. So just developing that awareness, how am I going to create a blend and a transition to make this look more realistic is the starting point.
I love the idea in there. You say learning to see, and maybe that caught my eye because I'm a Van Halen fan, and there's a song called "Learning to See" by Van Halen. But and I like that concept. You show this area in the book, and you're saying there's more to what you can, just the basics of it that you see. Okay, track this, a tree, this and that, but then start really looking, like you said, looking for the different shades and the different tones. And it's not just gray, it's dark gray and light gray and medium. And there's other mix of tones of colors in just that one thing you're looking at, and being able to just really open your eyes and open your mind along with that and really absorb a scene is just
and I think
a mindset that's got to,
my roads were too uniform. I think as a hobby, we tend to have grass areas that look more like our front yards. We're creatures of order, but when you get away from the golf courses, our front yards, and the shopping centers, unfortunately, Mother Nature gets really complicated in terms of the patterns. And if we don't try to copy that to an extent, it is going to look like a golf course or the entrance to a shopping center. So it's just something we need to be aware of.
Yeah, for sure. The differences, and instead of just like you said, just being able to see all of that and then absorb it, and then try to then understand how to emulate it and what the shades are compared to the products you're getting. But your book does an awesome job of talking about that too. And like I said, it's not just a how book; it's a how and why book. And then I think that's really what makes it great. Is you're not just saying how to do something, but you're talking about why. and in the theory behind it is just really helpful to understand as you're doing these projects.
Oh, thank you. And the good news is, particularly if you have a modest size layout, is this, unlike a rolling stock, this stuff is really not that expensive. And a lot of the techniques are achievable, not all of them, but a lot of them are achievable by anybody. In other words, if a high school student walked into your office and said, I want to do this, can you show me? A lot of it, even if he had never seen a model railroad, if you said, do step A, do step B, paint the rail this color, apply the ballast this way, he would have a pretty decent start there. So a lot of times it's just as easy to apply the right color as one that's not realistic. It can be easier to use a good material than some of the old standbys.
Yeah, and you're gonna achieve a better result that's in turn gonna keep that flywheel turning that we talked about earlier. You're gonna feel better about what you're producing, therefore you're gonna be more inspired to keep going and keep producing more scenery and keep moving that process forward.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's awesome. And again, this is a great book. I'm talking about Scenery for Modern Switching Layouts. We'll provide a link in the show notes for the book. A lot of really great stuff in here. Some stuff I was surprised about, to be honest. I didn't think, even let's talk about ground cover, using grout and the advantages of the different shades of using grout as a material for ground cover.
Boy, I'll tell you that. I don't think that was something I thought up. I don't know how it occurred to me, but that material, Ray, is a gift from the gods. I mean, excuse the pun, but it is dirt cheap. And the colors are just so real. I get mine at the Home Depot, and the labels are, unlike house paint, with all these fancy names. I mean, bone means it's bone colored. Charcoal means it's charcoal color. And, I have the colors in the book, but it just lays down so well and so easily. And the colors are so realistic. I mean, and you can mix them, you can blend them. It's really a boon for the hobby. The only downside is $20 gets you 60 pounds. So what the heck are you going to do with 60 pounds of charcoal grout? I mean, you need to go with a couple of your buddies and say, all right, we need to tag team this and split these things up. But it really is a great product.
Yeah, so we're talking about, I've got a buddy that we're going to split some of this, and apologize for the shakes. I've been drinking about 20 cups of coffee a day because I need some coffee cans to put the grout in to split it up. But no, it's really neat. Just some of the stuff, and I guess one of the things for me, and I started doing this on 14-inch shelves. That's where I kind of started experimenting after I got your book. I said, I'm going to make a shelf. I got a buddy who's got a locomotive. I'm going to make a diorama for him, a little display shelf. So that's what I do. I got in there and I just made a 14-inch shelf, trying all the different things. And it wasn't even a layout. It was just laid some track and, put it on a base and just started experimenting with the techniques. And boy, it's just a lot of fun and neat new stuff. And it's all coming from the book, and you lay it out. It's like a recipe book, but it's beyond that. I love the theory behind it as well, and the things that are in there that really do that. I want to ask you one question though, as you talk about these techniques and you talk about things that you've learned. What is like one technique that you've said in the past you've used, but now you kind of look back and go, I probably shouldn't have been doing that? What are some of the lessons that you've learned as you've in your modeling thing? What one sticks out to you?
Well, two. One was the roads. I came up with like a two-tone road treatment. I wrote about it on the blog. A lot of people copied it, but over time, like I said, you don't want to get too full of yourself and think, oh, that looks great. And I was looking at them, and it's like they don't really. I mean, they're passable, but if you look at a typical street from above, like if you went up on a parking garage and looked down at the street below, you would just see the complexity of the colors. And that was something I was not happy with. So I put a lot of time into practicing and kind of research and development to get a better look to the roads so they weren't so monotone. And I think all of this is pretty attainable. The big surprise was how forgiving grout is for weathering. I use weathering powders a lot, but they can be aggressive, and once they bite, you're not going to get them off. Whereas the grouts, like a neutral gray, for example, it's much gentler. So you can rub it in with your hand and it will very subtly bring the color up. So that was an area that I was not happy with before. And then the other were gravel lots, particularly in the industrial areas. I mean, just gravel parking lots or areas with chip dust in it. I would use just one color. I would just take N-scale ballast. And that I was not happy with that. And it just bugged me more and more over time. So I just put more effort into, studying the pictures of what it looks like. You have all the tire tracks in that are slightly darker color. And again, using the grout, how do I, just add some color transitions to it? So one thing I wanted to emphasize too, and we talked about it earlier, is, and I think this goes for everybody, I didn't roll up one morning and be able to do this. I've been in the hobby for 50 years. I couldn't do it. I didn't have the skills. I couldn't figure it out. So everything in the book, it didn't come overnight. I just took these 6x6 foam and I would practice and try, and half of them ended up in the trash can, and then you live and learn, and then gradually I was able to dial it in. So the lesson, particularly for somebody that doesn't have a layout, is this is a time to practice. Get some foam samples, 6x-inch squares, and just practice the stuff in the book, and be very open to, chucking things in the trash can and doing it over. But if you don't have a layout, now is the time to start dialing this in.
I think that's a grand theme. We were talking earlier about, obviously East Rail for you, and then, these 6x6 things, but just honing your skills before you get into, bigger and bigger projects or whatever you think you want to accomplish. And one, again, finding your why through that process, but having that ability, it's only 6x6, toss it, move on, try it again, do it a different, try the, different technique, or just practice. And I think that's just a grand concept, and easy to swallow, easy to manage when you do it that way.
I used to have an old sales trainer 30 years ago. His name was Al Granum. I'm sure he's passed away, but he was a World War II gunner on battleships. And his mantra was, always practice when you're not being shot at. You want to know how to use that gun when the Jap Zeros aren't trying to kill you.
That's a good theory.
And so here's the application to model railroading. I've made every mistake in the book. If you spent $200 in detail parts and 3 months detailing that locomotive, it might be a good idea to practice your painting and weathering techniques on a scrap before you jump into the locomotive. Because if you do what I did, you will learn in a hurry that it's not fun to have that kind of investment and screw up the paint job, and there is no way to reverse it. And so I always dial every technique in off the layout. Once I have it down, then I move to the layout, whether it's scenery, painting, weathering. I never do my first run on the actual model.
Very good advice, and a great way to learn the hobby and slow down and be patient with it. That's one thing I have to teach myself. I have the patience of a gnat sometimes. So it's kind of just reeling it in. And those are great ways to do it, a little bit at a time, small projects, hone the skills, build it up. And then, and then of course, if you don't like it, toss it and change it. And don't be afraid to make those changes either. Well, Lance, it's been another great opportunity to talk with you. We could go on and on about a whole bunch of topics. This book is fantastic. I recommend anybody who's looking to do any bit of scenery to get themselves a copy of this book and check out the techniques in there. And of course, you have a whole library of books that you've put out as well. Definitely go and check those out. Most, I believe, are available on Amazon.com. And of course, the list is on your website, LanceMindheim.com. We'll provide all the links in the show notes. Lance, it's been a pleasure once again talking to you here on Around the Layout.
Well, thanks as always for having me, Ray. I always enjoy it. Looking forward to our next get-together. Time really flies.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, AroundTheLayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at AroundTheLayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, AroundTheLayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, AroundTheLayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.